Welcome, I'm Terry Christensen and this is Valley Politics. Today we'll talk about the November election with Bob Nunez and Steve Preminger, the chairman of the Santa Clara County Republican and Democratic parties. We've asked each of them to focus on a couple of races they consider significant, and we'll also ask them about the impact of the election of Donald Trump on the future of their parties locally. Later, Camille Llanes-Fontanilla will brief us on the work of SOMOS Mayfair. Then, on Where Are They Now, we'll have the second part of our interview with longtime developer and local mover and shaker Chuck Davidson. All this next on Valley Politics. Welcome everyone, and welcome Bob Nunez, chair of the Santa Clara County Republican Party, and newly elected city councilman in Milpitas. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Steve Preminger, chair of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party. So I ask each of you to pick a race or a set of candidates that you thought was particularly significant in the local round of elections. Steve, what was your pick?
Well, I picked a few elections. The one that stood out for me was the race for the 27th Assembly District. The race was between two Democrats in a partisan race, but because of the top two primaries, that's what we work with, between Osh Kalra and Madison to win. And I think a lot of the smart money, and there was a lot of money in the race, really was expecting—
I think it was $9 million altogether.
Unbelievable amount of money. And most of it not raised by the candidates.
Right.
That came from stakeholders or interest groups that I wouldn't think would play in Santa Clara County, but the legislature's a big place and folks want to have relationships. So I know the charter school industry, I think, weighed in on Madison's campaign to the tune of about $4 million.
Some pretty nasty mailings.
Very nasty, ugly stuff. Didn't really talk about issues.
Right.
So I think voters knew Osh Kalra. He's a current council member in San Jose, I guess now for a very short time. But he was out there campaigning. He would be at every single event in the 27th Assembly District, talked about his issues, talked about his values, and had a great cadre of volunteers.
Where did the volunteers come from?
They probably came from the local schools and from labor, and folks came from a number of places. But
in the Democratic Party, he was Democratic endorsed, wasn't he?
Oh, you know what? That's a very fair point. I forgot my what hat I was wearing. The Democratic Party was very interested in that race, thinking that it was going to be all uphill because, again, Madison had the money. She finished, I think, 15 points ahead in the primary. Right. Kind of, wiped out all the other candidates that ran. And we're enthusiastic and excited because of the reason we endorsed him, which is he's very good promoting democratic values. He's hardworking. He's very accessible. He's not a monolithic thinker. He's interested in hearing all points of view. I would think everybody would be enthusiastic about a guy like that.
Quit selling now, he's elected.
And enough voters agreed with me so that he's in.
So, Bob, this was one of many cases where the Republican Party was frozen out. There were 5 races in this county, 3 Assembly, 1 Senate, 1 Congressional, that because of the top 2 primary, it was Democrat versus Democrat. There were 27 districts statewide, and of course there was the U.S. Senate seat.
Right.
In that U.S. Senate race, 1.5 million people didn't vote for U.S. Senator who voted for president. So my suspicion is they were Republicans who weren't too happy with the choice. How's the Republican Party going to cope with this? You're getting frozen out of races.
Out of some races. So in this race, we purposely stayed out of this race. What we have decided to do is ask the candidates that did run in the primary, that are Republicans, their preference. What did they want us to do? And in this race, our candidate asked us to stay neutral, and we did. You can take a look at some other races in this county where we actually decided to support one of the Democrats in the race. Not endorse, but support. But in this case, we gathered the Central Committee.
What's that mean, support but not endorse?
Which
Didn't we hear this a lot about Republicans with Donald Trump too?
I hope not. I think what we did is said, okay, we will go out and we will inform our members, our Republicans,
Right.
that this person has certain values that are Republican. Maybe not all. Maybe he has a business sense. Maybe they have certain things that our candidates, we would wish to have our candidates would also be looking at. But that's the person that we would like them to vote for. But it's different than an endorsement, is that we're not going to spend money on them. But that we
But
would
overall,
inform.
the top two primary working like this can't be a good thing for the Republican Party in California.
Well,
You're down to 26% registration statewide. I think under 20% registered Republicans in Santa Clara County.
Well, and I've heard that. I think that if you take a look at our numbers overall, we don't have the numbers to say that we are going to be in the top 10. We're going to be in the top two. If in fact we don't have it mandated. And what we want to be able to say is who are the top two persons that we would want in that race. So would we like to go back? You know, I've heard that discussion by some Republicans, but right now we think we'd like to have the top two persons that the electorate would like us to have there.
Steve, what's the Democratic Party think about this? Because what you end up with is big fights between Democrats with big money spent, $9 million in Assembly District 27.
Well,
surely that money could have been spent better someplace else with a competitive
We've
race.
always opposed the top two primary for that reason, especially in the Senate race between Jim Bell and Nora Campos. It was a repeat. You had the primary, basically, and then the general. Twice as much money was spent as I think needed to be. So we think it doesn't give the parties a chance to show who they are. It obviously wipes out minor parties, and so we don't think it's had the intended effect. It just seems to increase the costs without the added sort of zesty discussions that I think the framers were originally thinking would happen.
And then Democrats won super majorities in the House, in the Assembly and the Senate in California, and yet because of divisions within the Democratic Party, partly as a result of the top two primary, doesn't mean you've got 2/3 vote necessarily.
Correct.
You've got 2/3 membership,
Right.
but real divisions within the party.
Right.
And
That's
then the
a fair
Republican
distinction.
Party may not even be there to make a deal with one or two votes that Democrats need.
Well, I do think, though, that they will be there. I think that the Republicans have, in fact, been able to, in local races, but actually at the state level also, have an impact, because I've seen a shift now from those that are, and you've hit it on the head, I think, those, though they may have the sheer numbers, they're not all going to be voting one way anymore. And I think that's because of the influence we have had. Now, what we need to be able to do is wrestle back the numbers that we have so that, in fact, they don't have the supermajority just in sheer numbers. And we came close this time, and I expect us to take it back in 2 years.
Well, we'll see.
It just seems ironic to me that when you talk about take it back, you're talking it away from 2/3.
Yes.
Just a little irony in my book.
They only need to take back one or two.
That's
One or
right.
two
That's
seats.
right.
Still,
That's
Fair
right.
point. No, but your point earlier was
Yeah.
that just because you have a D after your name doesn't mean you're going to be in lockstep with the leadership, either in the Assembly or the Senate.
and that's really never been true.
Right.
Lockstep
Right.
in California,
Right.
right? Well, let's go back to some other local races. Bob, what was your pick for the most
My
significant
pick was
race?
really the mayor's race in Milpitas.
The mayor's race in Milpitas. Lots of us don't know a lot about that.
That's right. And the reason I picked that one is because, to me, it really reflected the national race, in that there were a Republican and a Democrat running that were really supported by both parties. And two persons, Debbie Giordano for the Republicans, Carmen Montano for the Democrats. both long-term persons that had served in city council, school board.
Yeah.
It really had value that they had added and such. And then there was this other person that was running, really had not been elected to any office, hadn't been on the scene, and a Democrat, and was running a sort of an unorthodox sort of race, and he won hands down.
And that's Richard
Tran, and a bright young man, ran a race that I could not put my hands around, my brain around as he was running, and really came out and was plugged into the community. Did a lot on Nextdoor that I'd not seen done before. Engaged the community, and like I said, he won by, I think it was over between 9 and 10 percentage points.
Wow!
And each of the women got around 20%.
Right,
I think.
right, and so, and if I look, he was not on anybody's radar at all. And it was a complete surprise because the persons were talking about the other two all the way until the election. And if I take that nationally, that really was what caught us by surprise. And so,
we have a big Asian population in Milpitas.
We do.
So that should have helped him. Could have helped him.
Could have helped him. But the other two also had a large following in both of those. But I think it spoke a lot to, the more the other two said, we have experience. It hurt them, I believe, really? in that regard. And I think that Richard kept saying, I've never faced that, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do something different. I'm willing to come and talk to you. And he was successful.
Well, he'll be somebody to watch.
He will be. And I would have rather he have an R behind his name than a D, but I am looking forward to working with him because he has the pulse of that city, and he is not afraid to tackle any problem whatsoever.
Well,
Steve,
and you did well in your race. You came in first place. Not that we're here to talk
first
about
place
you.
is, no, we're not. But first place is good. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm sure it was a challenging field.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Steve, what were your other picks of significant issues?
Well, I think the affordable housing measure, Measure A, was a tremendous victory. We talked earlier about having supermajorities. That was the minimum that was mandated for that to pass.
Needed
two-thirds of the voters had to say yes, and it got two-thirds and maybe a
almost
few hairs more
68%,
than that.
yeah.
So it was a tremendous campaign. There really wasn't anybody campaigning against it, but when you're asking for people to shell out bucks, you don't necessarily need a lot.
That was a bond, so it goes on property tax.
Yeah, and the beneficiaries weren't necessarily you and me. It was largely homeless people, veterans, people who were just starting to get into the housing market, people who maybe wanted to live around where they worked. So it was a tremendous statement on the part of the voters in Santa Clara County. So that's why I was so pleased.
And I think it's a big shift in people's attitudes about housing in general, and adding to the housing stock. People really are getting it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was a nice coalition of people that came together. Labor played a huge role. The community came together, and lots of others. And it's all good.
And I'd have to say that from the Republican point of view, it really appeared to me that the Board of Supervisors, Cindy and others,
Cindy Chavez,
Dave Cortese,
really listened this time to persons that said, because this was going to be something that was managed by the county. And coming on the heels of what happened over at Valley Med, Republicans were saying, we're not really sure that's the right place. And instead of saying, no, that's not true, or ignoring that, they said, well, what's the problem? Tell us what the issues are. And they came up with 5 or 6 things in place to make us feel as if you heard us. You put things in place that were safeguards. You made us part of the process. And we were then able to go out and say, here's the reasons you should, in fact, be voting for this. And I think that went a long way. And for Republicans to go out and say this is something you should be doing and voting for and supporting, I think was a big plus.
Bob, you had an issue, ballot measure you wanted to talk about too. Which one was that?
That was B.
That B is the transportation tax.
That was.
Did the Republican Party support that?
Yes. And almost every elected Republican office holder supported that. And the reason for that was that we could specifically see what every city was going to do. They could see the money coming in, what was going to be done. And it wasn't pie in the sky. It wasn't going to be something that was just dangled out there. And for the first time, we could actually have a list that they could go out and show their constituents and say, this is what was going to happen.
And it was a very well balanced, smartly balanced package.
Right. And it was the number one issue if you went out to the communities was transportation and how are you going to get from point A to point B. And our members said that is the number one issue in every city in this county.
I think A and B were important, but I also think we should point to F and G. F was the pension modification measure passed by the San Jose voters. G was the business tax. A and B, F and G, and Measure B from June, the sales tax for San Jose, I think are going to get allow San Jose to wake up from its long fiscal nightmare, all those budget challenges that the city's faced for so long. So that was a combination of really good outcome for the county and especially for the city of San Jose. Guys, we're just about out of time, but I got to ask you, Donald Trump won the presidential election. What do you think the impact of his election as president will be on the Democratic Party locally and the Republican Party locally? Start with you, Steve.
Well, in short, there are a lot of people that are still in shock, and every day is very unnerving with the kinds of choices he's considering. So obviously it remains to be seen where we go from there, but I've got to think that this is something we all now have to get involved in.
Bob, Republican Party. Santa Clara County Republican Party.
So
20% of the registered voters in Santa Clara County.
I like the way he defines it.
Which is what you got 20%. He got 20% of the vote too.
That's true. I think that we also are in shock. This is a pleasant surprise. I think that persons here now have to figure out how do we take that and make it very positive. We read and see what's happening, and if you go out to some of these demonstrations that are out there about how persons feel about it, we understand that, and you'll find us out there also saying we need to make sure that persons feel that it's not as bad as persons think, because you just watch where Trump is going, and his views are changing, and I think it's by who he surrounds himself with. And I agree with Steve. I think we need to make sure we're engaged. I think that Steve and I talk, I believe, on a regular basis so that things aren't as dire as they may appear. And my belief is that he needs to do that in Washington. He needs to make sure that he surrounds himself with persons that give him both points of view, and that they have an opportunity to influence who he selects for those positions, those cabinet positions. I believe his son-in-law is a major factor in all of this.
Well, we'll see soon. And the important thing is we all stay engaged.
That's right.
So Steve Preminger, Bob Nunez, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Camille Llanes-Fontanilla will brief us on the work of SOMOS Mayfair. Then we present the second part of our interview with Chuck Davidson, a successful housing developer, a colorful character, and an influential force in San Jose politics for decades.
SOMOS Mayfair is a community-based organization in the Mayfair neighborhood of East San Jose, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. First established in the early 1900s, Mayfair has always been home to working poor immigrant families. Today, Mayfair is home to over 13,000 residents. At SOMOS Mayfair, we implement a unique and innovative approach that is executed at the hands of community leaders and activists, or promotoras. We work with over 500 families with children ages 0 to 8 in the neighborhood to close the opportunity and achievement gaps. Toward these goals, SOMOS Mayfair organizes a broad network of neighborhood leaders who are building a grassroots movement of families working together to ensure that our children are entering kindergarten fully ready for school, our children are proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade, and that community members are demonstrating personal and collective action to help move the needle on critical community issues. To learn more about our work and to get engaged in our efforts, visit somosmayfair.org. Thank you so much for your attention.
You were known for your sort of aw shucks, country boy, chewing tobacco, storytelling style, folksy style at city council meetings, which was very entertaining to the audience and apparently very effective with the decision makers. How much do you think your style had to do with your success?
Let me put it like this. The first and foremost thing is to know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Secondly is to be trustworthy. And third, you gotta present something in a style that you're comfortable with. And you understand that was not an act. That is my roots.
Yeah.
You know. And when you put the whole combination together, it served me very well.
You are an Oklahoma boy. I think your family tried to get you to go back to Oklahoma.
Yes.
To run for governor.
Yes.
Why didn't you do that?
I said you can have fame and fortune, but you can't have both. And I want fortune, and that's in California.
So you stayed with us
Yes.
to build your fortune.
Yes.
You were on the commission that rewrote the San Jose City Charter in the 1960s, and that new charter, the charter change, introduced direct election of mayors. Previously, mayors were members of the council serving in rotation, so not directly elected as mayor. Why do you think that change was so important?
Let me give you a little bit of history there. You know, we wrote that charter in 1964. You know, machine politics had ruled San Jose, and machine politics had ruled the county of Santa Clara up until the middle 40s.
Yep.
So this idea of an elected mayor was a very sensitive subject because we had several people on that commission that had been opponents of those machine politics just 20 years earlier. So that was only 20 years before. We had already become a major metropolitan city by then. You need an elected spokesman to speak for the city and to rule the city. So what we did when you had appointed mayors, you will evolve into a strong city manager form of government.
Mm-hmm.
That's got some downside risks to it too. So how do we avoid machine politics? Well, like I say, this was a sensitive, drawn out subject on the charter committee. One thing, we limited them to 2 terms. And
Right.
another thing is we didn't give them specific powers. I defined the mayor as the political head of the city. Now, Ron James was elected as the first mayor in 1967. He only chose to serve 1 term, and then Norm Mineta ran in 71. Norm came over to my house and spent hours trying to understand what did I mean by the political head of the city.
Yeah.
And I said, that means that I give you all the power that you have the leadership ability to take. If you don't have that leadership ability, I'm not going to give it to you by charter. And yes, we did need, you need a check and balance between mayor and a city manager.
The appointed city manager,
yeah.
the professional administrator.
Yeah. You need a check and balance.
Subsequently, we've made some other changes to the charter, including district elections, full-time pay for the city council, more authority and power for the mayor, particularly over the budget. What's your opinion of those changes?
I was on that revision committee that came up with district council members, although you could still make some pretty good arguments out pro and con over districts. But you know, and I voted for it. When we wrote the charter, council members got $5 a meeting. That was $20 a month. So the new city charter gave them a big pay raise, $400 a month, $600 for the mayor.
Yeah.
That was still a part-time job, but now it's a full-time job. You got to more or less give full-time pay. Now, what you're talking about, more power to the mayor, was in the 80s, what they call Measure J, was put into the charter. And that gives the mayor more power. And whenever the group that put Mayor Jay in came and talked to me about it, I said, tell me, what do you do when you give the mayor this extra power by charter, when you elect a crook for mayor? And they said, oh, Charlie, you just make sure you never elect a crook to mayor. And I said, grow up. You always elect a crook sooner or later. And sooner or later we will elect a crook. We are set up pretty much now so that we can't have machine politics. And that was the fear from bygone days, Terry.
Yeah.
Because there are places in the United States that still have machine politics.
Yeah.
And and San Jose has been blessed with the fact that it's had good mayor. Ever since we had elected mayors, they've had good mayors. They've been blessed with that. But sooner or later, you're going to get somebody that's not so good.
Some people are saying San Jose should take the next step with our mayor and make it the mayor actually a strong mayor, rather than having a city manager as executive, have a strong elected mayor with veto, budget, appointment powers. What do you think of that? And I take it from what you've just said, you wouldn't agree with that.
No, I don't agree with that at all, because a city manager, mayor form of government has proved to be the most effective form that there is. That's a check and balance on one another. If you're strong, if you make that city, that mayor any stronger, one of these days you're going to move into machine politics. And that's not particularly good for society.
Right.
In my opinion.
Okay, well, one final question. Overall, looking back over 50 plus years in San Jose politics, what do you think's changed? What are the major changes in city politics over that period of time?
You know, there are no fundamental changes.
No fundamental changes.
There's changes in style,
Yeah.
and there's changes in sophistication. But just like the last 60 years, there's been no fundamental changes in your automobile. They're still comfortable. They'll get you from point A to point B. Fundamentally, they're the same. They're more sophisticated. One of the things that we got going on now that is a little bit troubling is the fact that people forget that the politics is the art of compromise. And we're getting people nowadays that say it's my way or the highway. And you're getting too many of those. And there is no divine ordinance that says that we will always be a good society. We'll be a good society as long as we want to make it a good society. And that's the part that concerns me the most, is that we don't understand that in a free society, you got to live in a world of compromise. And that's politics. Now, so far that hadn't shown up heavily on the local basis. But eventually it will filter down to the local basis. And people had better start thinking about what they're doing if they want to stay the way they were.
That's it for us until next year. Meanwhile, you can catch up on previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for CreateTV San Jose. And you can let us know what you think about the show and suggest topics or future guests by email at valleypolitics@creatvsj.org, on Twitter at valley_politics, and by following us on Facebook. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching Valley Politics. See you next year.